Hello, I'm Ariana Love, TLB Director of Middle East Rising. Today we have Alexander Azadgan with us. He is a multi-awarded professor of strategic global management and international political economy. He's senior geopolitical analyst with Iran's Press TV, Russia's Tsargrad TV, and Sputkin Radio, as well as being editor-in-chief of Middle East Rising and the Liberty Beacon on Middle Eastern affairs. Professor Azadgan is an expert in Middle Eastern affairs, and he is an American-Iranian based in Laguna Beach, California. So today, here with us today, by the way, everybody, our audience, this is raw and uncut, very impromptu. So we wanted to get this out there before Professor Azadgan travels to Iran. He is here with me today to talk about Zionism, the history of Zionism, its occultish, Kabbalistic roots and agenda, global agenda. So, Professor, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me, and let's hope to make this one a series of conversations, strategic conversations we're going to have with our audience globally.
Great. So we just decided to do a 2-hour recording. So because when Professor Azadgan and I start talking, it tends to go on for hours. And there's a lot of information that we can provide to the audience. I really wanted to expose Zionism and what it is. I had a lot of people asking me, coming to me and asking me what is Zionism and to explain it to them. So then we decided to do this show. Yeah, so let's see, where should we begin? Would you like to talk about the history of Zionism?
Yes, I think that's a wonderful way to start. One of the things that I'm very keen at is etymology of terms, of certain words such as Israel or Zionism. I think etymology is very important because it unravels the truth just in the actual meaning of the word. So let's start with what exactly does Israel mean, and after that, after a brief talk on that, let's talk about what exactly does Zionism mean etymologically, and then we'll go into its contextual meaning as it pertains to today's geopolitics and also media. So, what does Israel mean? The name Israel comes from the Hebrew verb savar, which means to rule or to be strong or to have authority over, thereby making the name to mean, for example, God rules or God judges. Or El, which is the Hebrew Canaanite word for God, El fights or El struggles, which is really interesting because here we are told of the word struggle. And in Arabic, the word struggle is jihad, which unfortunately has been butchered by the savage terrorists in the Middle East as well as the media. We have to be balanced and fair. The savagery in Middle Eastern terrorism in the form of ISIS or Al-Nusra or Taliban or Al-Qaeda or even Boko Haram in Nigeria, every time they use the word jihad, they defecate on the actual righteous and biblical and Quranic meaning of the word jihad. But interestingly, when it comes to Israel, it can also be translated as El struggles, so the jihad of El, which I think is very ironic. In the Jewish Study Bible of Oxford University Press, it states that the scientific etymology of the word Israel is actually uncertain, but a good guess is that God or El rules or triumphant with God, which are very interesting variations. Anyway, that's what the word Israel literally means. It's a sacred word that has been defecated, unfortunately, by political opportunists and completely secular, not in a good sense, but secular in terms of anti-God activists, which is the very foundation of Zionism in the 1900s in Europe, 1897, if I'm correct, to be exact, in Austria. So anyway, that's what Israel really means. So let's go to Zionism, and we'll, during the course of our 2-hour discussion, we will distinguish, the difference between the two and where they actually converge and where they diverge. But for now, let's just focus on the etymology. So interestingly, in Psalms 87 verses 2 to 3, we read these very powerful words where the word Zion is actually mentioned. Quote, "The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are said of you, Selah," which literally means city of God. So that's one of the first appearances of the word Zion. I've studied with rabbis that have written not just books, but encyclopedias out of this passage. Let me repeat the passage again. Again from Psalms 87 verses 2 to 3. "The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are said of you, Selah, city of God." So the gates of Zion is very interesting in the Christian etymology, Christian eschatology. The Eastern Gate, of course, is the gate that the Messiah in Christian eschatology is supposed to come in the end times through the Eastern Gate in Jerusalem, in the Old Temple, and with the Jewish eschatology, that is a little bit unclear or very shady. We don't know which gate the Mashiach, the Hebrew word for Messiah, which gate he's supposed to come in from. So we'll leave that for a side. But according to the verse I just quoted, Zion is synonymous with the word Selah, which literally means city of God or Jerusalem in Hebrew. And that is a place that God loves. Mount Zion is the highest hill in which King David, peace be upon him, built his citadel. You know, it is on the southeast side of today's Old Jerusalem, part of the city. So basically, Zion is this hill, sacred hill, a mount. Who knows what was under that? Who knows if there was a pyramid under that? That in throughout time, you know, because of earthquakes and because of storms, you have this natural mound sort of built on it, and on top of it, for some esoteric reason, King David decided to build his citadel. We don't know that. I'm speculating, but we can go deep into occultism and mystery schools and even ancient alien theories to find out what exactly was under that mount. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the word Zion occurs 150 times in the Bible. It essentially means fortification. I mean, that's what it exactly means, and has the idea of being raised up as a monument. Zion is described both as the city of David and also the city of God. So we have this convergence between an earthly king who is, you know, destined to rule by God. In Islamic understanding, he's also known as a prophet of God. This is also interesting. I need to interject here. In Judaism, in Old Testament, we have the holy prophet and we have the king assigned by God. In Islam, the king and the prophet, the holy prophet, are one and the same. Of course, during the times of David, we have Samuel, who was the messenger of God, the holy prophet of God, according to the Old Testament. In the Islamic understanding, also King David is a messenger or prophet. Prophet in an Islamic context means a messenger. That's also a title reserved for angels. It's not that these human beings were angels. It's just that they were also messengers of God. They were transmuting a message that was, you know, put into their heart and their soul, and their heart and their mind by Yahweh or by El. And this is where we get the word Allah from the word El. Anyway, I'm going, you know, out of topic, but then again, all these things are interconnected. So, so the word Zion expands in scope and takes on an additional spiritual meaning when we talk about it as being a city of God. So just to sum this up, Zion was originally an ancient Jebusite fortress in the city of Jerusalem. Now, who were the Jebusites? These were the people, highly spiritual people, that somehow either had a convergence with King David's plan, or the Old Testament tells us that King David actually conquered them and took over their city. So so whatever this Zion is, whatever the mountain fortress city of God, this was an idea that was already present in the Canaanite spirituality, and which was continued, or it's got its sustenance or conquest through Judaism. So I don't know. Let that be just the etymology of the word. Let's just have this in our hearts and in our minds as we continue this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. The last time we talked about Zionism, it was such a fascinating conversation. I think it went on for 6 hours.
Yeah.
And you were talking about its historic roots from, the times of the Khazarian Jews and the Ashkenazis. Can you clarify the difference between Ashkenazi and Khazar? And maybe we can start from that origin, in the region of Georgia, where they came from.
Anytime you want to sort of interject, please feel free to do so, okay?
Okay.
So who were these Khazarites? And that's how it's pronounced, Khazar. They actually have a sea named after them. The Sea of Caspian, another name for the Caspian Sea, which is between Iran and Russia and all these other countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, on the west coast of it, and on the east coast of the Caspian Sea, you have Kazakhstan and all these other countries. That's actually also known in the Middle East or in the Persian terminology as the Sea of Khazars, which is very interesting. So maybe there's no country called Khazaria if people don't understand distant history, but actually in the region, or at least in the Iranian perspective, the sea is still called the Sea of Khazar in many Iranian maps. So who were these Khazarites? There are many different theories. Khazars, there's one theory that says the Khazars were also known as the Scythians in very ancient times. These Scythians or Scythians, depends on how you pronounce it, were expert bowmen on horses. Excellent cavalry, not just cavalry, but also bowmen on horses. They were extremely fierce, warrior-like people that sometimes later, when you had the Roman Empire sort of in existence, they were used as mercenaries and never actually hired and recruited by the Romans. If you recall from popular media, King Arthur, there's a movie called Arthur or King Arthur that Hollywood made not too long ago with the British actor Clive Owens, if I'm correct. In the very beginning, they interjected that actually possibly King Arthur could have come from the Scythians. That the Romans went to this area and they abducted people and they took people's children, recruited them into the Roman army, and the whole movie, instead of making the plot in the Middle Ages, which is where we get our understanding of King Arthur, it goes way back to Roman times. I thought that was a very interesting clue. Some people say it was historical revisionism in this Hollywood movie. Some people say they were actually revealing some parts of esotericism about who King Arthur is, going back to Scythians. At any rate, the Khazars, some people hypothesize was a new name for these Scythian peoples, which were steppe people. They lived in the steppes. You mentioned Georgia. There was a vast piece of land that extended from Georgia to today's Ukraine, to parts of Russia where the Ural Mountains hit the Caspian Sea, and of course from the left of the Ural Mountains we have the European continent, and from the east of the Ural Mountains in Russia we have the Asian steppes. That's actually the border between Asia and Europe. At any rate, Khazars, sometimes in the 6th and 7th century, were caught in between the Russian Orthodox Church and Islam that was rapidly expanding from south, being the Middle East. At some point, they decided to convert to Judaism because that was the political expedient thing for them to do in order for them not to become Eastern Orthodox Christians or become Muslims. So
this was about what time frame?
This was in the 7th century.
7th century. So
onward.
Okay, so this was a population of about, wasn't it 450,000 people in the region?
Nobody knows how they were. It could have been 450,000. It could have been millions. This is a lost part of history.
Okay, so then there was the Crusaders, the Christian Crusaders coming down from the north, from Russia, and then there was the Muslim, would you call them Crusaders, coming up from the south?
Muslim conquest. The word Crusader literally means those who take on the cause of the cross. And that happened much later. The Crusaders came in the 1100s, late 1100s or around that time. And it continued all the way basically into 1300s even, until the Christians gave up. And you had the formation of the Ottoman Empire in the 1400s that created a huge buffer zone between Middle East and Europe. And at that point, by that time, you no longer had the traditional crusades that we hear of, the crusades that are in fables now with Knight Templars and Knight Hospitallers and Salahuddin and all these great Muslim generals. You had an end of that. But what we are talking about is way before that, in the 7th century, actually. This is right when Islam came about. As Prophet Muhammad declared his revelation in the late 600s, and from that on, it was spreading like wildfire because the message was very new, and also you had the infrastructure. Nobody talks about this. This is very factually correct. You had the infrastructure of the great Persian Empire that was already there. So when you had this vacuum, when the Persian Empire was defeated by the Arabs, the conquering Arabs, the infrastructure was there, and that was one of the reasons why Islam spread so fast. At any rate, these people called the Khazars, they didn't really want to convert to Islam. They were not exactly sophisticated people, but on the same token, they were very shrewd from a war and conquest perspective. So they decided to, the speculation goes that they decided to convert to Judaism, that they were not ethnic Jews whatsoever, that they just decided to convert to Judaism because their scholars had read the Muslim holy books, and they realized that if you are one of the people of the book, and the people of the book are considered Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians of Iran, if you're considered people of the book, you are supposed to be protected by Islam. You're not supposed to be necessarily forcefully converted. So they were aware of this, and that's why they decided to convert to Judaism and maintain their own distinctness, their own distinct Khazarite sort of characteristics, and that way they will not be able to be touched by the Muslims. Now, on the Christian Orthodox Eastern Front, the Jews, since the very conception of Christianity, were very much used as black goats, as scapegoats. So I don't know how they managed in their treaties with the powerful Russian Tatars and ancient Russian czars. I don't know how they managed to have some kind of an understanding with them not to be, attacked. That's another part that we'll leave for another discussion. It's a very worthy discussion. But at any rate, they were somewhat spared by the Muslims. Not somewhat, completely spared by the Muslims, because the Muslims viewed them as Jews now. Go ahead.
Okay. So would you say that their reverting to Judaism was a political decision based on their geographic location?
That's what the alternative historians tell us. Mainstream historians don't even cover this. They're so behind. They're so politically correct. They don't even cover this stuff. You have to go to alternative historian sources, non-mainstream brave historians that are telling us exactly what you just stated.
Wow. And this is interesting because this root, this Zionist root that starts with the Khazarian people, and these are the Ashkenazi Jews, right? It's the same.
It's a little bit it's very convoluted, because you have to understand, from the time the term Ashkenazim came in, you're looking at a good, I would say, 800,000-900,000 years. So that was another term. We had the Sephardic Jewish people who basically migrated from Middle East and into North Africa, and then into Morocco, and from Morocco into Spain. And of course, what happened in 1492? In 1492, we had the victory of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel of Spain over the Moors, over the Muslim rulers of Spain. And at that time, once they conquered the entirety of Spain in 1492, they expelled the Jews and the Muslims out of the Spanish territory, which is modern Spain. Those Jews are known in history as the Sephardim, in Hebrew, Sephardim Jews. And they moved on. Some of them moved to Middle East because they were very much welcomed in the Middle East as people of the book. Some of them moved to Netherlands. Some of them moved to Northern Europe. And then from the East, you also had this migration of what you may call the Khazarite Jews. And later on, they became known as Ashkenazim Jews. And these people basically moved from Ukraine and Georgia and southern Russia into the West, into Poland, into Romania, into Bulgaria, into Germany. And they somehow became known as Ashkenazim Jews. And in another interview, we can go entirely into these two distinctions of that of Jewish people at that time. So I won't really want to cover that, but that's a really worthwhile and time-worthy discussion for another
Okay.
time.
Okay. I think it would be worth to talk about how the Ashkenazi Jews, they maybe to discuss the Talmud and the Torah, and to explain how they, well, I mean, a lot of people, okay, people may know what the Talmud is. They may or may not know, but it is the book that the Jewish people were following before Moses, prophet, according to Muslims, prophet Moses was born, peace be upon him. And he brought and inspired a new teaching, which inspired the Torah. How I understand it is that the Talmud, it's a very dark practice. I mean, there are 6 pages within the Talmud, I've read them myself, that condones an adult male marrying a child that's 3 years old in a day. And pedophilia is condoned, and some very horrific practices that are within the Talmud. And as I understand it, there were... they took the Torah and inserted it into the Talmud, and it's sort of Judaism today, they sort of follow both. They study both instead of going with the teachings and following the message of Moses.
That's these are very interesting points that you brought up, perhaps worthy for an extended interview unto itself, but I'll briefly comment on some of the things you mentioned. Now, the Talmud as we know it today was compiled sometimes in the Middle Ages. Nobody knows when. But its roots and its teachings and its origins and its writings go back to a long time. And historians are still fighting and arguing about how far does it go back. Because you have to understand, from the time that Moses liberated the Israelites from the tyranny of the Egyptian pharaohs, from the time they left Egypt and basically went into wandering for 40 years, that is a date, that is a time frame that the Bible tells us, the Old Testament of the Bible tells us. You had the Mosaic Judaism, which was the correct Judaism, which was the authentic Judaism, which was the Judaism which was in line with the teachings of Abraham, Isaac, and Judah. The 3 patriarchs of Judah. You had that, and you had this other understanding, sort of rebellious, this rebellion that was taking place within Judaism right in those 40 years, right when Moses went up to the mountain, Mount Sinai, and put his brother Aaron in charge and his sister Miriam. Right from the time that you had this people sort of taking over the teachings of not the teachings, but I'm sorry, there's some noise here. Forgive me for this. Can you hear this?
A little bit, but I think we can hear you louder.
I have to ignore it. I'm used to the classroom when there's absolute silence and TV studio. So at any rate, I apologize for that. So you had this divergence right from the moment, literally from the moment where Moses put his brother and sister in charge and went up to the mountain to receive the holy commandments, which are known as the 10 Commandments. And then you had the leader of the rebellion or of the apostasy take over. He even forced Aaron, who was a priest, who had the knowledge of the Egyptian priesthood, to make him that golden calf, and then worshiping the calf, which is symbolic of something much more than the actual golden calf. This is very poetic language. At any rate, and then you had the divergence happen at that time. So who knows how far the Talmud really goes, but yes, there are some very despicable things within Talmud, and I don't mean to insult our Jewish brothers and sisters who look upon to Talmud as instructions. It is also a code, a codified form of Judaic instruction. And you have to understand, these people were, after the destruction of Temple in AD 70 by Titus, General Titus, they went into diaspora. Some Jewish people stayed in Jerusalem and what was used to be known as Judea, but the majority of them were put into slavery and taken away. There's even a theory that the Colosseum was built by Jewish labor, or the majority of the laborers happened to be Jewish. So not the original Colosseum, but the restructurings that they did and the upkeeping. But some people even go as far as saying that the Colosseum in Rome was even built by Jews at that time. So Jews were huge nation at that time in the Middle East. But at any rate,
isn't it true that the Sephardic Jews, the Palestinian Jews, they're called Sephardic Jews, who were living there before the occupation of 1948? I mean, they were really never persecuted. They were persecuted elsewhere, but they were never persecuted or expelled from Palestine, and had lived there for thousands of years.
Let me actually correct you. The Palestinians are not Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews were ethnic Jews. The Palestinians, that's another really huge study to undertake. Some people say the Palestinians are actually immigrants from some of the islands in the Mediterranean. That somehow they were actually, this is a theory, of course, that they came from these islands, they settled the land, they somehow had many peace treaties with Canaanites. They actually became Canaanites, many of them. And later on, the term Palestinian came about. Now, my understanding of the word Palestine is this is also a very historical word, as historic as the term Judea. But the Romans, because they were very much hateful of Judea and the independency of the Jewish people in that area, and also the Jewish chosen people idea, that the Romans decided to name that land Palestine in order to distinguish, in order to sort of relinquish the Judaistic claim over the land. So from that point on, I've been using the term Palestine. But going way before that, way before the Romans came into picture, into ancient history of Judaism, we always had these people that were known as the Philistines. The Philistines are Palestinians. As a matter of fact, in the Arabic language, the word for Palestine is Philistine. But of course, in the Old Testament, the Philistines are portrayed very negatively. The Philistines, for example, in the story of Samson and Delilah, are portrayed as the people who influenced Delilah, or actually sent Delilah as a but in today's term we would call psyop operator, as a spy, as a snitch, into cutting Samson's hair, which again, that whole story has esoteric interpretation. The hair itself was just the tip of the iceberg. But those were the Philistines, and Delilah herself was a Philistine. So in the Old Testament, the Philistines or the Palestinians get a very bad rap many times. And we always hear of the constant wars between the Israelites and the Philistines. And isn't it ironic, those fights, those arguments over the land, over power, over territory continue to our very modern times. But
I have never heard that there's, there were lots of battles going on in Palestine. I mean, historically, it's like a big mess. But
the big one, the big enemy of Israelites were always the Philistines or the Palestinians, and according to the Old Testament. Of course, you have to understand the Old Testament is from the Judaic perspective. If you want to understand the Philistine perspectives, you have to go to cuneiform writing and all these other sources to figure out what they were saying. But yeah, the Sephardic Jews were, to put it very adamantly, these were the Jews that were expelled from Jerusalem in AD 70, and also the community of Jews that migrated out of Jerusalem many centuries before the destruction of the Holy Temple in AD 70. And so the word Sephardic literally means the Jews of the Middle East, whereas the Ashkenazi means the Jews of Europe. Okay.
I'm curious about something. I mean, recent studies of DNA tests, have proven that, there's two things I want to say. That the majority of the Jewish community today are Ashkenazi Jews.
Yes.
Like 98%. It's the overwhelming majority. And then that's one thing that's worth mentioning. And another thing is that when you describe the historic Israelites, the DNA of the Palestinian people is more related to the actual Israelites than the DNA of the Israelis or the Jewish community.
Of course.
And of course, DNA doesn't lie. So here's another twist in the soup.
You have to understand, throughout centuries, there were a lot of intermarriages. There were a lot of illegitimate relationships. So the DNA is a story of humanity. We can't really, it's not distinctive. It's not authoritative in the sense that there is no one pure race, in other words. There is no such thing as a pure race of Germans or a pure race of Jews or Persians. none of those terms mean anything. Those are terms that are used by racists to justify their narcissism. So as far as your question about, the DNA makeup of Palestinians being closer to today's, Sephardic Jews, at least, of course, they are both, sons of Shem. Who was Shem? Shem was one of the three sons of Noah. We had Shem, we had Japheth, who was another son, and we had Ham. And of course, we get the word Semite from the word Shem or Shemites. So their genetic makeup, of course, would be very close. The Jews and the Arabs are ancient cousins. They had the common father of Abraham, and the common grandfather of Abraham. And then, of course, the Jews come from the line of Prophet Isaac, and the Arabs, which Palestinians are a part of, come from the line of Ishmael or Ismail, as we say in Arabic. So their genetic makeup is very close. Now, their genetic makeup of Arabs or Middle Eastern people or Semite people, of course, is very different than the Ashkenazim, because in the course of what we just talked about, Ashkenazim, at least partially, could descend from the Khazars. Now, the Khazars have no genetic commonality with the people of the Middle East. These were totally different race, different faith.
So the real Jews, the true Jews, the historic Jews are Arabs.
No, the historic Jews are not Arabs. They're the cousins of Arabs.
Right. Okay. That descends from Noah. Okay.
Yes. The minority of Jews today, like you stated correctly, only a minority of Jews are Sephardic. The majority are the European Jews or the Ashkenazim. And the reason they were the majority is that they were more liberal than back throughout the history, not now, but they were more liberal than the Sephardic Jews in the sense that they didn't just intermarry because of conquest, because of immigration, because of illegitimate relationships, which is rampant in all races. Their numbers rapidly grew. Whereas the Sephardic Jews, they tend to be geographically closer to each other. They only married in, and of course that's one way to make sure your population actually dwindles and even decreases.
Intermarrying with cousins and
intermarrying, absolutely.
Intermarrying within the family.
Ashkenazim Jews, you had a lot of intermarriages too, because they formed a community in Eastern Europe, very strong, tightly linked communities. And they're intermarried a whole lot more than, say, 500 years prior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's but these are all speculation, historical speculation. We back them up by facts, but there are many theories. What I just explained to you is just one theory of history. It's not definitive. Nobody's theory is definitive because we're looking at distant history with limited historical writings. We're going by limited evidence, and from that limited evidence, we make deductions, we deduce, and we come up with theories. So, so these are all, I wouldn't just say speculation, these are historical and scientific speculations, not just conspiracy theory, ridiculous, just making things up. It's not that. These are historical speculations. Nonetheless, they are speculations.
It's interesting that the Ashkenazi Jewish community, they're actually the community that's ruling the world today, wouldn't you say?
Yes. Now we are taking that direction into modern mysticism, modern occultism, modern esotericism. Not in a good sense, of course, in the worst sense possible.
Also, like, how did they get to this place of rulership? I mean, can you explain some of the history, how they conquered?
Yes, the church, especially the Western church, the Catholic church, not the Catholic church of today, which of course has reformed itself quite a few times. It reformed itself after the Reformation in Europe, and it did some huge reformation in the 1960s with the Second Vatican Council. The First Vatican Council was right after the Reformations in the 1500s, and the Second Vatican Council was in the 1960s, I believe 1962. The reason I'm invoking the church is that the church has been historically very anti-Jewish. Another term that they like to use is anti-Semitic. It was actually very anti-Jewish, going back to the very story of the Passion of the Christ. The church, taught for centuries that the Jews committed deicide, or the killing of God Himself, the killing of Christ, according to Christian understanding of God or Christ. So they were blamed all these centuries for deicide, which was the worst crime, ever in the universe, according to the church. So the Jewish community in Eastern Europe, especially the Ashkenazim community, because you have to understand the Sephardic community after the fall of Spain, many of them went back to Arab countries. Many of them migrated back to Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya. We still have Jewish communities in those countries. Most of them migrated to Israel since 1948 and a little before that, but we still have vibrant Jewish communities there. At any rate, the Jewish community in Eastern Europe, anywhere where the church, or Western Europe for that matter, Germany, Netherlands, where the church was very predominant, they experienced extreme persecution. Pogroms that are beyond anything that the Nazis did. Pogrom that would go into a village in parts of Russia and they would just massacre people simply for the fact that they were Jewish. So there was a lot of historical evil committed against the Jewish people, whether they were the Khazarites or whoever, it doesn't matter. They were Jews. They practiced their form of Judaism and they really identified themselves as Jews. At any rate, we had all these persecutions and evil and pogroms gave rise to the new political movement of Jews. This happened in the 19th century, in the 1800s, where political or cosmopolitan Jews, because at that time they even had a distinction between tribal Judaism versus cosmopolitan Judaism. So, cosmopolitan Jews, we have some amazing people who came out of these movements. You had Karl Marx, we had Sigmund Freud, we had incredible intellectuals that came out of cosmopolitan Judaism, Ashkenazim Judaism. So the political end of it sort of came about in the late 1800s under the leadership and under the intellectual direction of this character called this Austrian Jewish person called Theodor Herzl. Even today, he's regarded as father of modern Zionism. And a lot of the terminologies that the Nazis used were actually used later, I would say 60, 70 years later, were originally utilized and used by the fathers of political Zionism, such as the Jewish question. It was Theodor Herzl that openly talked about the Jewish question. What are we going to do with the Jews in Europe? They're not welcome. They haven't been welcome for 500 years or so, or even longer in many instances. What are we going to do with these folks? We don't feel at home here. We need to migrate somewhere out of Europe. At that time, they even had a theory of relocating the Jews all the way to Madagascar, the island of Madagascar off of the southeast part of African continent. So they didn't, because the Zionists, you have to understand, were secularists, they were cosmopolitan Jews. They were not necessarily practicing Jews in a religious traditional sense. They were not really interested in moving into the Middle East, into Palestine, because that's where God gave him the land. They didn't believe in. They just wanted to be separate from the Europeans because the Europeans practiced a lot of evil against them, and what have you. So there we had, the origins of today's modern Zionism, the political Zionism, and also I'm going to talk about religious Zionism when that time comes up in our interview. So,
I think it's worth mentioning, how it was really the hand of the Zionists that created the Israeli occupation of Palestine. The Israeli occupation, it's not Israel, Zionist Israel, it's not a state. It's never been recognized as a state. The UN doesn't have authority to award statehood, neither does the United States or whatever. So it's just an illegal military occupation still. And that's so sad because it doesn't give anybody security. They terrorize the Palestinians ongoing, and at the same time, the Israeli people born into this don't have any security. They don't really have a homeland. They're buying time, And I forgot what I was going to say, but it's important to mention.
Yeah. If it comes to you, please interrupt me. But it's tragedy over tragedy. If you can imagine an onion. Layers of different onion, right? An onion, an actual onion has many different layers. So the tragedy that we're seeing between the Palestinians and their Jewish cousins, the Israelite cousins, is a tragedy on both sides. We had horrible tragedy for, I would say, 2,000 years that was inflicted on the Jewish people, one layer after another, within Judaism, within the Israelite
But
communities.
not in Palestine. There was more than 2,000.
You mentioned the Ashkenazim and the fact that they're the majority, and they're the ones that came up with this scheme of Zionism. I'm talking about those folks. I'm talking about European.
Europe.
I will distinguish that in a second between Middle Eastern Judaism. So the European Jews experienced one layer of another of persecution. And so they basically projected all their centuries long of persecution and anger, which kind of got built into their genetics. They decided to unleash that on the poor, defenseless, innocent Palestinians who had lived in that area of the world, not for 2,000 years, but maybe for 5,000, 6,000 years, or some people say go as far as 10,000 years. So, and then to distinguish between the point you were just making is that the Jewish people, the Sephardic Jews who lived in the Islamic or Middle Eastern communities, yeah, of course there were some minor problems, but overall they lived in peace and prosperity and what have you. Even we have historical records that Salahuddin, or Saladin as it is known in the West, his personal physicians were all Jewish people. So they emerged really well within the Islamic world in comparison to the European savagery, I may say. And they enjoyed a very good standing. We have many Jewish scholars who flourished under the Islamic rule. You know, we had Rabbi Maimonides in Spain, who during the time that Spain was an Islamic nation, you have to understand Spain was Islamic for 900 years. That's the figure that the historians give us. The Jewish people thrived under the Islamic rule or Islamic, governments of various sorts all across Middle East. It was the anti-Semitism. What is known as anti-Semitism is really, I hate to say this, and I don't mean to insult my Catholic brothers and sisters, but it was really a Catholic teaching. It was not Islamic teaching whatsoever. The Islamic understanding of what happened to Jesus is very different than what the church teaches. If I may say, in the Quran, it is Jesus was not crucified. This may be a shock to your viewers. In the Quranic and the Islamic understanding of what happened to Jesus, it was actually Judas Iscariot who was crucified. That gives us 2,000 years of historical misrepresentation every time we look at a cross and you see this figure on the cross. In the Islamic understanding, that was Judas, because Judas, for some reason, we can go into esotericism with that, he looked very similar to Jesus. Some people say he was his twin brother. I'm not going to that. That's deep occultism, but maybe at some point we will. That the Romans mistook him, and by some miracle of God, Jesus was somehow lifted into the heavens as a live human being. So the Islamic understanding of resurrection is not is very different than the version that the Catholic Church taught us. The 3-day death and resurrection from the tomb and all that. The Muslims believe that Christ never died. His faith was so strong, just like the story between Abraham and Isaac, where a sheep was provided so Abraham didn't have to sacrifice his son Isaac, according to Jews, and according to the Muslims is Ishmael. The same thing happened with Christ. He proved his loyalty and God lifted him up. And the person who betrayed him, Judas Iscariot, on the cross. So
even the Bible confirms that Jesus was taken up. I mean, they say he was resurrected first, but he was also taken up. I mean, there's so many similarities between the Quran and the Bible. I mean, when I read both, they're virtually the same.
Yeah.
And we don't know what the Catholic Church did with the Bible because they've kept some parts of it hidden from the public. They keep them in the Vatican and the vaults, and no one got to read them. And of course, we know that during the translation of the New Testament, which is again the introduction of Zionism in about 100 years ago, they reformed Zionism. And during the translations of the New Testament, they did insert things into the Bible that shouldn't have been there about Israel. Again, leading towards their agenda.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. You have to understand the Bible that we have today goes back to the Council of Nicaea, which was put together by a very shrewd Roman Caesar, Constantine. Constantine saw all the fights between various sects and denominations, even if I may call it that, of Christianity, brought these people together at a place called Nicaea in the year 323 or 314. I have to look at it. It was a process, in other words. And all these people, and also I have to say this, the most historically accurate Christian sects were intentionally left out of that council. Why am I mentioning this council? Why am I invoking the Council of Nicaea? Is because the modern Bible that we have today was put together by all these theologians at that time in order to bring the empire together, because Christianity was causing the Roman Empire to split ideologically. So absolutely, the Bible we have today is only part of the story. A great deal of it was intentionally left out. A lot of church fathers who had the apocryphal gospels, the mystical gospels, such as the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, such as the Gospel of Thomas, which is getting a lot of exposure since the Dead Sea Scrolls were unraveled in the late 1940s. All these gospels were Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There's one even called the Gospel of Jesus Christ himself. All these that were written on papyrus, written on paper, were left out in Egypt or the caves surrounding Palestine. And of course, these all came out in the late 1940s. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and all these other Qumran, scrolls were discovered. And the church has been really trying to suppress that, because that shook the foundation of the so-called modern Christianity, of so-called Christianity. The Christianity we have today is very much a compilation of Mithraism, which was a Persian religion adopted by the Roman soldiers, and all these other occultic and all these pagan religions. Emperor worship was inserted right into Christianity by calling Jesus Son of God. This was a title reserved for the Roman empires. They were known as the sons of Jupiter. So the early Christians, in order to compete with the pagan beliefs of the Romans, had to make Jesus Son of God. In the reason, some historians argue that the reason Islam came was to correct both Judaism and Christianity. In Islam, we are told that God has no sons or daughters whatsoever, genetically speaking, physically speaking, that we are all children of God, but there is no one genetic, if you may even call it that. It's not genetic, it's at the realm of spirituality, Son of God, the title that they gave Jesus Christ. So there's a lot of deviations within Christianity, historical Christianity, that got embedded into Christianity we have today, which is really an apostasy. Many historians argue.
That's fascinating. And I think people, if Christians, okay, when I talk with Muslims automatically know that Christians are their brothers and sisters. Jews and Christians are their brothers and sisters. This is how they regard them. But you talk to Christians, and Christians don't have that same belief. They don't look at Muslims as their brothers and sisters. But if you just go a couple steps back and you realize that these traditions, they all come from the same human being, which was Abraham.
Abraham.
Yeah, and why would there be a need for Islam? I mean, basically, if you really, the teachings of each of the prophets are identical. It's the same message. Yeah. And why would we even need Islam if Christianity was alive and preserved in its truest form? And I think a lot of people don't, I mean...
Ariana, the first adherents to so-called Islam, they didn't go and say, okay, we're going to create this religion called Islam. That's not how it came about. The word Islam in Arabic means to submit to the divine will of God. So the people who went and say, we have a new message, they didn't say we have a, you know what I'm talking about? Somehow Islam became a name unto itself in the Western tradition. When you label something, you negate it. So it was they were simply saying we are trying to promote a new understanding of the submitting to the divine will of God. And in Arabic, because Arabic is a very precise language and it codifies words into single words, the reason for that is because Arabs didn't have a writing. It was all through the tradition of the oral tradition. They know, because and people have to memorize things. So do you have me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had a call coming in and I had to cancel it. What happened to my mic? Do you hear me?
I hear you, yeah.
Oh boy, we lost our audio. Hang on.
I hear you. I can hear you.
I have to disable my calling feature.
Yeah, I know. It's not modern technology.
You just learned now. They were just going around saying, submit to God's divine will. And somehow, because Arabic, like I said, there was no writing until much later, the tradition was passed orally. So they had to shorten terms so people would remember them and memorize them, as the fathers told the story to the sons, as the mother told the stories to the daughter. Hence the term Islam. So it was a continuation of Judaism and Christianity. It didn't just come about to create another religion. It was a reformation, if you may call it that. Of course, today is a very distinct religion with its own codification and rules of conduct and liturgy. It has its own liturgy, such as prayer, fasting, going to Mecca, what have you, giving 1/5 of your income to charity. It's been codified much later, but in the beginning, it just came about to especially correct Christianity, especially Christianity. Today's Muslims have more. Today's Islam has more in unity, more in convergence with Judaism than it does with Islam, than it does with Christianity. So it's very ironic that the Palestinian or the Muslims, I wouldn't say Muslims, but well, we can't say Muslims. It's very ironic that certain people within Zionism, I'm not even going to call them Judaism, have a deep, deep hatred of Islam. We all have a deep hatred of terrorism. That's a given. We all have a deep hatred, righteous anger, righteous indignation against these savages that use the terminology of Islam, or they abuse the terminology of Islam, and they call themselves Muslim. The whole world is at war against them, and so are we. We must be, in order to protect the true Islam. But in the modern age of media and fast communication, people don't have time to go and study these things unless we talk about them in interviews like this. So it's just a tragedy that the conflict between
that there's so much misunderstanding. I mean, Christians, I beg Christians to read the Quran. And if they knew how Muslims really think, it's so almost identical to Christianity, really. And Muslims believe that Jesus is going to return.
True Muslims. We have to identify the term Muslim. We have a false Muslim. ISIS is false Islam. We have to say that right off the bat. We cannot be, we have to be fair and balanced. Taliban, these savages in Afghanistan known as Taliban, false Islam. We have, Daesh, or ISIS, as I mentioned, Boko Haram.
Al-Qaeda.
In Nigeria, false Islam. So instead of calling them false Islam, what do we call them? We go right to the point and we call it Wahhabism, which I can talk about if you want to. Wahhabism is the state religion of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This is a complete deviation, an apostasy from true Islam. What does the world see? Wahhabism as a true Islam. These are the ones that are committing the terrorist acts. These are the ones that have taken America hostage, literally, in terms of foreign policy, along with their Zionist brothers. And I will go into that if you want me to talk about the roots of who these Wahhabis were. Well, I may just mention it here real quick. There's historical evidence coming out that the Wahhabis who migrated to what was at that time known as the Arabian Peninsula, what is known as Saudi Arabia, these were apostate Jews of southern Turkey. They moved to that area because the Ottomans saw them as apostates, okay? They even produced a false messiah at that time. Became very popular and misled many people. Anyway, it caused a lot of problems for the Ottoman Empire. They were expelled to the furthest area of Ottoman Empire, the most desolate area, which is known as the Arabian Peninsula. Once they got there, they were very politically expedient. They immediately converted to Islam, but not the true Islam. They came up with this Abdul Wahhab, who is the founder of Wahhabism, came up with his own very barbaric and intolerant version of Islam. And today we have Wahhabism, which is the state religion of Islam, which is one of the two pillars of Saudi Arabia. The one pillar is the 30,000 strong Saudi royal family, and the other hand, you have this Wahhabi clergy. These two are the two pillars of the modern state of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, known as KSA. So isn't that interesting? Isn't that an interesting
Very
fact?
interesting.
The Wahhabis and Zionists are literally brothers. They literally are brothers.
They are, because their origins are in this Khazarian Judaism?
Something like that, yes.
Okay, this is interesting because we know there's been a lot published on this, that ISIS was created by the US, Israel, UK, and the Rothschilds, and the Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia released several thousand of their worst criminals and, pardoned them of their crimes. And they were on death row,
Yes.
And they gave stipends to their families, money payments to the families. And they went and joined forces with ISIS, first Al-Qaeda and then ISIS.
Yes.
So this was a fabricated.
That you mentioned that, just real quick, if I may interject. I always write in my writings, I always say one sentence. People have short attention span. I always say ISIS is Saudi Arabia without an embassy. And what you just stated is absolute fact. Yes, these were the worst savages. First with Al-Qaeda. ISIS is Al-Qaeda 2.0. I always say that. So absolutely what you just said, they released the most crazy lunatic criminals within the Saudi prisons, and they let them loose. Of course, they, like you said, they pay stipends to their families, but they also supported these criminals in order to create havoc throughout the Middle East. These are not true Muslims. This is false Islam, better known as Wahhabism. All our energy should be directed at fighting Wahhabism and Zionism. We can't just fight the Zionism without mentioning Wahhabism. Today, Saudi Arabia and Israel are bedmates in trying to destroy Iran, for example. They're scared shitless of Iran. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. No, it's perfectly fine. I think our audience can handle it. Okay, I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm so glad you brought this point up, because Saudi Arabia's hand in this is crucial. This couldn't have happened without Saudi Arabia's support. And, if we backtrack a little, well, if we talk about 9/11, okay, I think it's important to mention it because this all ties in together. We had, Israel planting the bombs, chief enemy of the United States. We had an inside job with the CIA family, the Bush family, a small faction of the CIA, an inside job, and also Saudi financing. So, but it's interesting because today, the result of that was they had their scapegoats, their so-called Muslim scapegoats, which were all CIA operatives or working for the Saudi government. And they used 9/11 to start the Islamophobia campaign. And this,
Ariana,
yeah.
Isn't this interesting that right when you were just talking about what you're talking about, I'm seeing the TV monitor in the background. Right when you started talking about Rothschilds and Zionism, you had a picture of George Bush Sr. and Barbara Bush. You see it?
Yes.
You see it in the corner? These are the godfathers of Illuminati today. Right when you talked about it, they're appearing on C-SPAN right now.
And they have roots connecting to the Catholic Church.
They have roots going all the way back to the British royal family, the Bushes. And from there, the British royal family claims they have roots going to King David himself. Oh. These are all false, of course. This is how there's no such thing. These people are reptilian bloodline, the blue blood, as we call them.
Yeah, inhuman.
Whatsoever to King David, peace be upon him. But at any rate, I'm sorry. It just, when I saw it in my monitor, I just had to mention that.
That's it. The synchronicity of it.
Even C-SPAN is spilling the truth when we're talking about this.
Yeah, right. They're tuned. Yeah. So basically, what the enemy we should be fighting is Wahhabism and Zionism. And Wahhabism masquerades as Islam, but it's actually a form of Zionism, right?
It's a complete perversion of Islam. I wouldn't say it's a form of Zionism. It's not. It is. I will discuss Zionism, modern Zionism, in a few minutes when your questions direct me to that. But no, Wahhabism is a complete perversion of Islam. It is taking progression and modernity out of Islam and is substituting it with lunatic traditions that some of them go back to the Middle Ages, as a result of which you see this savagery of cutting heads, this total brutality that Daesh or ISIS is practicing. So, and it's condoned. It's completely, it's not condemned, it's condoned. There are places in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, there's a square over there where it's famous for cutting heads. They actually have a very modern drainage system where the blood goes down. I mean, unbelievable stuff that is practiced in so-called modern times, not for them, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But as far as their political policy, in modern Middle East, absolutely. I would say since 9/11 per se, their policies have been very much in line with Zionists. The points that you brought up a few seconds ago, what happened in 9/11. Of course, everything we're talking about 9/11 is circumstantial evidence. We don't have any empirical evidence. The empirical evidence is deeply archived within Russian intelligence apparatus, within American intelligence apparatus, within Saudi Mukhabarat intelligence apparatus, and within Mossad intelligence. The truth hasn't come out yet. It will. We have this all these threats by these 28 pages of the 9/11 report by a senator from Florida, a former senator, Republican senator. Of course, everybody's excited by that, but I'm not. I believe these are, if you really want to expose what happened in 9/11, you can't just blame it on the Saudis. You also have to unravel his hand in this.
I don't believe that those 28 redacted pages actually indicate Saudi Arabia at all. I think that it indicates Israel. And in fact,
they're threatening it against Saudi Arabia because I think that's their next area of conquest.
I think that they're using Saudi Arabia
under the Saudi oil, and Europe and Washington really want to get their hands on Saudi oil. The Zionist hand is so strong, Ariana. It's unspoken. They won't even mention them in reports. But the interesting thing,
I studied this.
The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman threatened. This is really interesting development. That if those 20 pages are ever released, that the Saudi intelligence is going to expose the Zionist hand, the Israeli hand at 9/11. So it's getting very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. In fact, well, I think that the U.S. and Israel and the U.S. are scapegoating Saudi Arabia to push the attention there because they want to take it off of Israel. And those redacted pages, I studied this and I published on this. There the senators and a congressman who read the redacted pages indicated that it was Israel.
Senator Graham is the one that's spearheading this effort. Of course, he's from Florida, where there's a significant Jewish population. So I don't believe he's trying to indict the Israelis whatsoever. Well, he's not. He's a former senator. Maybe he's just decided to grow a conscience. But why in Florida? If he came out of Texas, I would have had more sympathy for the fact that he wants to do this. But it's very interesting. The 28 pages don't mention Israel whatsoever. Israel isn't mentioned anywhere in the 9/11 report because they are the main culprits, okay? The reason that the Saudi leadership is showing such sensitivity, and the Saudis are very shrewd. These people, they don't exactly talk about these kind of things publicly. They're extremely desperate right now. The reason they're threatening that if the 28 pages are released, that they're going to release their own evidence against the Israelis speaks volumes.
And I hope that happens. It needs to happen.
This is the next evolution in the truth movement, in the 9/11 truth movement, which I'm sad to say has been totally hijacked by infiltrators.
Yeah, no kidding, huh? I've had that experience in the pro-Palestine movement with, I'd say that the majority of the people leading the pro-Palestine movement are actually shills.
That's right.
Just my observation, and we have to be extremely careful.
Extremely. But we have to rely on for me, in my faith tradition, it says when God is on our side, who can be against us? Even if they kill us, we will be stronger on the other side. Sometimes they have to kill us because we will be stronger on the other side. That is our destiny. God forbid, we want to be here and we want to do good in this three-dimensional reality. But when they do kill us, we will be stronger on the other side. We will have the fifth dimension on our side.
If
the situation, when we are on the path of righteousness and truth, it's a win situation.
It's inevitable. I mean, it's all of the prophecies do indicate that we will have our freedom, and the meek will inherit the earth, and we will rise up. It's if you have faith, you have some sort of comfort.
Absolutely, everybody, Ariana. In the Islamic tradition, we don't believe they killed Prophet Jesus Christ, but let's just say from the Christian perspective, Christ was martyred. Prophet Muhammad himself was poisoned. He was martyred. His holy progeny, where in Shia, the 12 imams, the 12th one being in occultation, he hasn't come out of occultation yet, but the 11 of them were all either beheaded or killed in war or poisoned. So when we are on the path of righteousness and truth, we should expect this kind of behavior. If we have a cushy life, if we are not persecuted, then we are doing something wrong. I'm not saying let's be, let's be sadistic. I'm not saying that. We want to live. We want to contribute to humanity. We want to breathe the good air. We want to enjoy the fruits of this beautiful earth. But if we are on the path of if we are on the path of righteousness and we experience righteous indignation and we are spreading the truth, we should almost celebrate when persecution and trials and tribulations come. That's part of the package. Christ himself talked about that openly.
Yeah, none of the prophets.
Of your cross. Cross is what? Symbol of the most utter, brutal form of persecution. It says, if you want to follow me, expect persecution, even to the point of being crucified. So there's no comfort. We only get our comfort from the divine providence, from God, who comforts us spiritually, psychically, emotionally, that we are going to be okay. But these shills, these moles that you talk about, first of all, they don't operate under their own, Ariana. You're a deeply spiritual human being based on the many hours of conversations that you and I have. These are, what my brother always says, is he always tells me God is in charge, God is in control. Even the shills, even the moles, they're not sent according to their own will. It's part of the divine will to test us, to build us, to really make us strong, make us warriors. And they do. In 9 out of 10 cases, they do. 1 out of 10 falls in the cracks and loses their faith. And that too has been prophesied. It's been prophesied by Jesus Christ himself, in the book of Revelation, that even the elect will be misled in the last days, or the last age, or the last eras that we're living in. Even the elect, these are the 144,000, some of the people that don't make it to the 144,000 figure are going to be dissuaded. In Islam, we have traditions of the most faithful human beings, the most true Muslims, toward the end of their life, they became apostates. Why do they tell us these things? To always watch out. So we would hang on tight to our beliefs, to our convictions, and to the righteous path we are on. Otherwise, it's very possible that even people like us would get sidetracked.
Could that be a reason why, I think about this, and I think that this is also another reason why, I think there's two reasons why Muslims are, three reasons. I have three reasons now why Muslims are prosecuted. Well, first of all, Muslims we're a demographic threat. There's 7 billion population, 7 billion, and there are 2 billion Muslims in the world. And the majority,
there's 7.2 billion people, 1.7 billion being Muslims. 1.6 or 1.7? It was
1.9.
Yeah, the number varies. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's between 1.6 and 1.9. Go ahead.
Yeah. So demographically speaking, we are a majority. If we were united, we'd be a powerful force. And that's one reason. Second, it's actually Muslims, the native people of the Middle East, who are being killed and bombed right now in Syria, in Palestine. Genocide is happening to Muslims.
Yemen.
Yeah, of course, Yemen, Iraq. And these are Sunni Muslims. Now, the majority of Muslims, are the Westerners. A lot of people in the West don't understand this, but the majority of Muslims are Sunni. That 80% of the global Muslims are Sunni. The majority of Muslims are not even Arab. Mm-hmm. So, there's these racist undertones that we see in Hollywood a lot, which is, of course, controlled by Zionists, as is the mainstream media. But the third reason, I think, is that Islam actually teaches you to tap into your source of power. And the human being's source of power is found within, when you are connected to the power that created you, you have access to source. You have access to knowledge that is beyond the mind, knowledge that comes through the spirit. And this was, in Christianity, it was called gnosis, pure knowing. Yeah.
Where we get the word knowledge from, kenosis.
And it comes, again, it ties into meditation, Islamic prayer. Science has proven that both a proper form of meditation practice and also Islamic prayer, both cure the body of all diseases. So
Yes.
when you have faith, like Jesus said, faith can move mountains. And
Yes.
that is our source of power. And even quantum physics proves that our very thoughts and what we focus our attention on creates the material reality around us.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to understand that, okay, if we are connected to our source of power, we can change what is around us.
And we are.
And
Mm-hmm.
we are. And these people who are controlling the planet through the financial slavery and financial banking and many other ways, they don't want us to be aware and to tap into our source of power. They want us to be mind controlled. They want us to be dumbed down so that we follow the program, we follow the agenda.
Mm-hmm. 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 But let us keep in mind for all our viewers that even those guys are under the divine will. They cannot do anything unless they're permitted to do. Because as you and I know, evil, and this is a very controversial statement for people who don't have any solid spiritual and esoteric understanding, but evil can be the most effective teacher. So even those evil guys and their schemes, as you brilliantly mentioned, financial slavery, Hollywood, they are there in order to strengthen our resolve, because only through contrast, only through the contrast of good and evil can good emerge for people. I mean, there is no duality, but for people who are still in this three-dimensional existence, the contrast will help them to take refuge in righteousness and good. So they don't operate under their own will or direction. They are allowed to. This is a great source of comfort for believers. I like to use the word believer. I don't like to use the word Jewish or Christian or Muslim or any, either we're a believer or not. That's basically at the end of the day, it comes down to that. Are we believer in this divine force for good and righteousness, or we are not, or we are one of these self-centered, self-worshipping, narcissistic people, which is the majority of people in the world today, being empowered by lunatic new age leaders into thinking they're God, and then, they're being led astray. That kind of mindset goes right back to the symbolic lessons we draw from the Garden of Eden, where the serpent told Adam and Eve that you're going to be like gods. And narcissism goes right back to that, You're going to be like gods. Don't follow the divine plan or the divine direction or the law. Do as you will. This is huge, This is what Aleister Crowley talked about. He said the whole of the book of the law is do as thou willest. That's the Luciferian message of the Garden of Eden. Go ahead, take the fruit. Do as you want. You determine what's right and wrong, not the universal law, the law of the universe that determines, what is right and wrong.
That removes completely the idea of surrender, which
That's
is
right.
the word of Islam is to surrender to the will of Allah, to the will of a creator. Right. And the Muslim is one who has surrendered. The meaning of Muslim is one who has surrendered.
That's all it means. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Would you say that Zionists, do Zionists believe in God or Allah?
No.
Are they believers?
We have two. Original Zionists didn't. Theodor Herzl, Sigmund Freud, even Karl Marx. Now, I'm not saying Sigmund Freud or Karl Marx were Zionists, but they were cosmopolitan, very successful intellectual cosmopolitan Jewish people of that time in the in the 18th century. Something huge happened in the 18th century because of the Industrial Revolution of the late 1700s. It's very similar to the times we're living in now. Instead of having an industrial revolution, we're having a technological revolution. So it's very similar times. Incredible ideas were introduced at that time as they are being introduced now. So the father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, these are very secular people. I would even say anti-God people. There's a documentary that our viewers may be interested in looking at on YouTube where these wonderful Jewish documentarians are going around in what is known to them as Israel, and they're quoting Theodor Herzl and other fathers of Zionism, literally taking sentences out of their books. They're quoting them to the people that they encounter in markets or bookstores or the streets, and ask the people, who do you think said this? Very interesting. I forgot the name of the documentary, but I will let you guys know when this gets published on our website. Many people said, oh, this, of course, Hitler or Eichmann or Himmler or any of these other monsters of the Nazi era. And at the end, the interviewer said, no, this was said by so-and-so, Theodor Herzl. And people were shocked that the fathers of Zionism were extremely anti-God and anti-Semitic, if I may say. The biggest anti-Semites are Zionists. They don't care about the Semitic heritage. They are secularists. They get the direction from their masters, the Rothschild masters. Talk about Chazarites. The Rothschilds are the major puppet masters behind Israel for their own esoteric reasons. We can talk about what's really in that land that the Rothschilds really want to get their hand on, because the original Zionists, they didn't care where they would go, as long as that would be exclusively a Jewish homeland. I don't think they even use the word Jewish, a Zionist homeland, whatever they use. Even, up to going to Madagascar, island of Madagascar off of Southeast Africa. It was the Rothschilds, Rothschild in the Balfour direction that settled for Palestine, in a sense that they created this situation that if the British foreign ministry, the British power structure in the early 1900s, prior to World War I, if they supported the creation of this country, this nation called Israel, then they somehow will get the United States to back up England and her allies and make sure World War I is won for their side. So there's a very practical geopolitical element to this, but more important than that, there's a very deep and dark esoteric element into this.
The Rothschilds, they signed a contract with Hitler. The Jews in America were boycotting Germany, and so Germany was, Hitler was in a very tough position, and he signed a contract called the Transfer Agreement with the Rothschilds, and that was, he agreed to transfer the Jews of Germany and also Europe, because they gathered them up into camps. He agreed to transfer them to Palestine. And this was prior to the Holocaust, the Holocaust beginning.
The Nazis,
so it was planned. The whole thing was planned.
Can you imagine if you had that? The Balfour Declaration is one page, historical record, no room for conspiracy or conspiratorial mindset. We have it on paper. Can you imagine if we had our hands on those Nazi documents, which basically pointed to the fact that Hitler was completely in concordance with Rothschilds. Rothschilds hate the Jews. They want Jews to be completely murdered. They wanted the Third Reich. They wanted the Holocaust. And even today, the reason the Rothschilds want all the Jews to be gathered in this nation called Israel is for it to be convenient for them to all be butchered. Okay? So if you're a true Jew, you would want to migrate out of Israel as soon as possible. As soon as possible. This was not supposed to be a homeland for the Jewish people. It was supposed to be a concentration camp for them to be easily butchered when World War III happens, which I'm sad to say we're at the threshold of it, if you don't take correction. So they are the most anti-Semitic people, these Rothschilds, even though they mask themselves as Jews. They are not. They're like the ISIS. They may have used this terminology, but they're anything but true Jews, okay? And Hitler was completely under their spell and under the direction. Anybody who knows anything about the Rothschilds is that they have always profited from war. They have always helped both sides of the war in every which way, going all the way back to Napoleonic wars. This is where they made their money, in the Napoleonic wars of the late 1700s into early 1800s, ending in the Battle of what? Let's see how good you're in the history. Waterloo, right? Waterloo was a masterpiece of the Rothschilds. They multiplied their wealth exponentially. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy fact. And even down to today's age, World War I, World War II. The Rothschilds are very much behind what's going to happen now with World War. They want World War III to happen. You have to understand, these are the people who profit heavily from war, and they totally believe in population control through war, through famine, through disease. They're behind it all. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact, okay? So
the new world order.
the New World Order is a pet project. The Illuminati is a pet project. I mean, we can go into the etymology of the word Illuminati, which comes from the word illuminated. This is the false, what we call the false light. The lights that are on me right now during this interview, this is the real light. But if I'm a very dark person, I could hold the light in front of you, and all you see is the light, but behind it, it could be darkness. That's literally what Illuminati is. The illumination that you are hypnotized with, but behind it is pure darkness, a pure black hole, if you want to use scientific cosmological terminology. So we have to expose these people by taking their light away, the light that is actually, hypnotize the masses of the world through their media, which they control. And this is how the truth is coming out through our wonderful awakening movement, through the truth movement. We are neutralizing them. We are neutering them.
And there's no stopping this. It doesn't matter how many truth speakers are taken out. Hopefully that will never happen. But it really doesn't matter, because it's a collective movement. It's unstoppable.
It's unstoppable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
this has been prophesied by the Essenes, for example. The Essenes were the true Torah Jews of 2,000 years ago. The Essene community, where Qumran, where they get a lot of Dead Sea Scrolls from, was very close to them. At any rate, the Essenes, the community where Jesus Christ came out of, these are the people who didn't believe in the temple in Jerusalem, or the Sadducees, or the Pharisees, these reptiles. They were outside. They were the hippies of their time, but they were very politically active. They didn't just move up to the hippie communities of Canada like a lot of hippies did here. They were very much active. They were the Green Party of their day. Okay, they were the Peace and Freedom Party of their day. Most people don't know the Peace and Freedom Party in America. In California, they're a very powerful party. At any rate, the Essenes whom Jesus came out of, and a lot of these Dead Sea Scrolls and apocalyptic Christian writings come from that community that has been suppressed by the church. The Essenes talk about, and they pick the time, which is the times we're living in, as the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. Talk about eschatology. If you want to understand true Judaic and Christian eschatology, you have to go to the archives of Vatican, and the scrolls are all there. As a scholar, you can go there and study it. You just can't take a picture. You can't bring it out. Or you can even go to Israel, and the Dead Seas are right there in the open, if you have knowledge of ancient Hebrew. And they talk about these things openly. So the times we're living in is literally the final times. These are the last days of the final battle between the sons of dark and sons of darkness. The thing is that the sons of darkness, they know they lose. They know they will lose at the end. They just want to take as many souls down with them. That's all it comes down to.
So so Wahhabism, the enemies, Wahhabism, Zionism. Okay, the founders of Israel, of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, they were all atheists.
Yes.
They don't even believe in a creator. That's just something I wanted to mention. But we have the enemies, Wahhabism, Zionism, and the New World Order, which is Zionists, which are Zionists. And I would liken them to a satanic cult.
Yeah.
And again, Illuminati, the Illuminist one, it's in worship of Lucifer. That's and right. The mind. They worship
the most Lucifer in Hebrew, luz, literally means light.
Yeah.
Lucifer literally means that it's written in the Quran and in the Bible, in the Old Testament. He was the most beautiful creation, the most lit, the most illuminated. Again, that's where they get the word from, Illuminati, the most illuminated angel of light.
They worship the mind. I did a lot of research into, and I never wrote an article on this. I don't know why, but I did a lot of research into the UN, the United Nations, and they are a Lucifer cult. I just straight out say it. Yeah, the founding of the United Nations it was founded by Alice Bailey, who was a known Satanist, and even on their website they talk about the return of Christ. They don't mention Jesus, just Christ.
Yeah.
And
Their own Christ, which we call Antichrist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's in cahoots with the design.
Look into this financial entity called Lucis Trust. They get that word from Lucifer. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, that's just where I was getting at. Is that the United Nations was established under the trust Lucis Trust by Alice Bailey and her husband, and 2 years later they changed it to, well, it was Lucifer Trust at first, and 2 years later they changed it to Lucis Trust, which is also a name of Lucifer. That's but right. It's less obvious.
Mm-hmm. I know, right?
Yeah.
That's because they looked at Lucifer as talk about twisted. They thought about the God of the Bible and Quran as the devil and Lucifer as the God. That's why they were open about it in the early 1900s. Alice Bailey, even Madame Blavatsky openly talks about it. Madame Blavatsky has some very interesting things to say, but she was a Luciferian. Out of that movement came Aleister Crowley. According to the BBC, the most evil man of the 20th century, even more evil than Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was deep into Aleister Crowley. There's some historical evidence that is portraying that. UN, totally a Luciferian project. They talk of openly, and the Theosophical Society too. You gotta look into that little monster. Even their logo is a snake eating its own tail. That's the logo of the Theosophical Society with the Star of Remphan, which they call the Star of David, which is not. It's a Star of Remphan. The Star of Remphan is mentioned in the New Testament by name, and it's totally ostracized. David never had a star. Solomon had the pentagram, which meant man. It means the totality of human being. You twisted it around, you get the Baphomet, which is the symbol of Satanism. But David never had a star, the two triangles. That comes totally out of paganism. It's the union of the masculinity versus the femininity. This triangle is the symbol of masculinity. You still see that on tanks and on the arm of enlisted soldiers all over the world, upside down like this, right? And this symbol symbolizes femininity, or the womb, which is and so when you have this in concordance to this with the triangle, you have, and this, by the way, was a sign that the misled Jewish priests made at the temple. Literally, they did this because they looked at the pyramids of Egypt with some fondness. Esoterically, they knew exactly what was behind that. So that got crept into Judaism, like so many other things that get crept into or that get included in organized religion when it gets deviated. But my whole point is that the so-called Star of David, which we call the Star of Remphan correctly, is right in the symbol of the Theosophical Society. They even went to India and picked somebody which they thought would be their Christ. This character named as Jiddu Krishnamurti, of course, realized their scheme and came out of it. He said, "I'm not the Christ. I'm just a teacher." But they wanted to call him the world's teacher. He was the true man. He's actually buried right here in Ojai, California. His library is still there. This is 2 hours from where I'm living. And he was a good man. He was a righteous man. He was, incidentally, for people who have never heard of Jiddu Krishnamurti, he was the greatest influence for Bruce Lee and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Those folks, those of our viewers who are into sports. So Krishnamurti was selected to become the Messiah, or their version of the Messiah, or what we call Antichrist, or Dajjal in Arabic. In Islam, this character is known as Dajjal, which literally means counterfeit. That's the word. Dajjal literally means counterfeit. I don't think we should even call it Antichrist because it gives the negative connotation of the whole Christ consciousness subject. I like the Arabic word Dajjal, which means counterfeit. At any rate, they have their own plan through the UN, the one world government, the desire to get rid of borders. The old saying, fences make good neighbors. This is so true. Borders make good neighbors. The only time when we're allowed not to have any borders is when Mahdi and Christ come together. And their world government is going to be the two world government. Their one world government, their world order will be the righteous one. These new terminology, new world order, one world government, they're, again, like so many other things that the Zionists are a master of plagiarizing, is an example. They use that concept of a divine golden age under the direction of God, subhanAllah, under its direction, again, in Islam, we don't use the word his or her to refer to God. That's where they plagiarize these concepts from.
They
So
mimic everything that's good and true. They adopt it, take it for themselves, and claim it.
yes, just like I mentioned in the beginning of our talk, Ariana, Zion. When we think of the word Zion now, it's repulsive now, but it's one of the most beautiful things. The hill of Zion. Who knows what's under that? It could be a whole pyramid, or it's deep in esotericism. They will teach you that stuff. But they took that and they called themselves Zionists. They took something so beautiful. The term Zion is so beautiful, so sacred, or the term Israel is so beautiful and sacred. They decided to call this Rothschild state Israel. It's anything but Israel. In my writing, in people like me who write about these things, we never call Israel Israel. We call it the Zionist regime or a Zionist entity. But even then, we are using the word Zion. So we have to come up with this new term for this piece of whatever, this land that they've grabbed, and not even use the word Zion. We have to plagiarize what they plagiarize from us. What they defiled, we have to make holy again. And the term Zion is a holy term. The word Israel is a holy term. In Iran, for example, they never refer to Israel as Israel. They always call it the Zionist entity or Zionist regime. This is a directive from the highest echelons of Iranian leadership.
And so that's why. That's the reason why, because Israel is a holy term.
Absolutely. Israel is a holy term. And Israel can only be called Israel according to true Torah Jews of today. Okay, I'll give one example of a true Torah Jewish the organization called Nutre Karta. These are the true beloved rabbis that are standing with Palestinians, standing with true Christians in fighting this Zionist entity. They are the most anti-Zionist people. They are the most beautiful people. I have met them. They are. When I looked at one of the rabbis, I said, "Rabbi, please don't take this the wrong way. When I look at you, I see the eyes of Jesus. You know, their understanding of Jesus is very different than ours." But I say, Rabbi, I mean this with the most sentimental, pure feelings. And of course, he looked at me and he just gave me a hug. As a Jewish person who doesn't believe in the messianic prophecy of Jesus Christ, he gave me a hug. There are many, we call these folks true Torah Jews. That's the term they picked on themselves. That's what we call them, because they're the true Torah Jews. So our battle is never with Judaism or the wonderful Jewish people. We love Jewish people. We are trying to save them from Zionists who want to obliterate them. They want to do what Hitler did to them. Okay, we love Jewish people. There are miracles happening even within the Zionist entity where people are so pro-peace, so pro-Palestinian, so pro-truth, so pro-justice. They hate this monster Netanyahu, a character straight from the deepest pits of hell itself. They hate him. They want to destroy him. There are movements that want to make him into the Christ. You know, they're deeply deviant and apostasy-oriented so-called Jewish movements that want to turn him into the Antichrist. You know, so I want to prepare him for that role, and which he is very brilliantly playing. But the evil that he has unleashed against the Palestinians for as long as he's been in any position of government. So our battle is against an ideology, never against people. Yes, the devil has his agents. Netanyahu is an agent of Satan himself. Ariel Sharon, his predecessor, was an agent of Satan himself. Yeah, there are few instances where we pick on people because they were criminals. They're butchering people. The entire so-called royal, I don't believe these savages are royal, but this Saudi royal family, so-called royal family, all of them are reptilians, especially the current personage of Mohammed bin Salman, the son of King Salman, so-called King Salman, whom the son is trying to actually murder. Most people don't know that. This guy is so power hungry. He's so devil. Of course, when you look at him, he looks like this big cuddly bear you want to hug. But he's an extremely dark person, again, straight from the pits of hell. Now, do we want to hate these people? My philosophy, my religious upbringing tells me I should love my enemy, that I should turn the other cheek. Even for these characters, we should have mercy. We should try to help them through our compassion, through our cognition, through the spirit of truth. Even these people which we should try to save, just like Jesus tried to save Judas Iscariot. Okay, so we should try to save them, but ultimately our battles are against ideology. How do you destroy an ideology, an evil ideology? by a better ideology, by a righteous ideology. That's what we should focus on. We shouldn't focus too much on our enemy. We should also focus on the vision that God has put into our hearts and our soul.
We
That's
have to
how
feed that.
energies. Yes.
We have to feed. We have to put our faith into this. The reality. We have to feed that with our thought. I want people to understand. I mean, from a spiritual perspective, what you're thinking in your house when you're alone, it does affect the universe. I mean, this is literally proven now. So
Yes.
we have to own that. We have to claim that. What you can imagine, it means it's true. If you can imagine something, it means it's real already. It exists. So we can imagine the best possible outcome that we want. We can imagine our victory.
Yes. I think the one reason is World War III is manifesting is because collectively as human beings, we're imagining the worst. And when we imagine the worst, we subconsciously and indirectly empower the dark side or the Rothschilds or whatever you want to call them. So just like John Lennon so beautifully in his song Imagine, just like he gave us the model of what to imagine. We should focus on the lights so much. We of course have to expose the lies and the dark side. I always tell my students that diagnosing the problem correctly is 50% of the solution. Exposing the evil is 50% of the solution. But we should also be cautious not to only focus on the 50%, half empty glass. We should always talk about the light and the truth, which is, operating parallel right now. We are like in a parallel universe in a way. There's so many amazing things happening. Look at technology. Now, technology is a tool to spy on us. The original people at NSA and all these people who are using technology for evil is also allowing me and you to connect, you all the way in Finland, me here in Southern California, to connect and spread this message on another technological tool called YouTube, which has a global audience. So it's incredibly hopeful. We are living in incredible hopeful times where a thought could be transmitted within a few seconds around the world. How wonderful if that thought is full of hope, full of inspiration, full of ideas, innovative ideas to solve the most complex human problems, human-created problems. So we're living in times of miracle, but the dark side, of course, wants us to only focus on evil and all the things that are wrong, because they feed off of that. They feed off of our energy, and they feed off of darkness. Each human being is a transmitter. Just like you see a electrical transmitter out in the country, huge electrical structures that have lines attached to them, and through the power of not Tesla's alternative current, but Edison's direct current, which was very archaic to what Tesla had in mind. But through the power of direct current, the energy or the electricity get transmitted. Each human being is AC, alternative current, and direct current. So we have to be very cautious with our thoughts because the whole universe is listening.
This is very interesting. And, I just want to mention how this is the very reason for the mind control programming, which, I don't, that's a whole show.
I lost you for a second. I think we're freezing.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Internet connection is unstable.
Ariana, we're frozen.
Yeah. I think it's back. It shows it's still recording. And speaking of technology, it's not perfect.
We got frozen for a second. We started talking about good things and they froze us.
Let's see. Is it still recording? It's still recording. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, we're still on. Mind control. This is how the mind control works, and this is why it's so effective. It actually, using one of the most powerful tools that we have, the media, the television, the suggestions, the subliminal suggestions are implanted into our minds, and we repeat them. We repeat them and repeat them, and we create the reality, the material reality. We create World War III by our thoughts. If we can just step out of that, I mean, I would just recommend everybody throw their television out the window. I haven't owned a TV in years.
In the 60s, now I'm not a fan of Timothy Leary whatsoever. whatsoever. I think he worked for the dark side without even knowing it. But he had some interesting thing he said. He was a professor at Harvard. He lost his tenure, became a huge godfather of the hippie movement. He said, what did he say? Tune out and turn in, or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? We have to tune out of the matrix, which is the mainstream media. It's not a coincidence that the Zionists exert tremendous amount of control in Hollywood, the entertainment part of the media, and then the news media. That's not a coincidence. This is a way of mind control and shifting minds and keeping them paralyzed. And this damn dog.
And one way to shift out of the mind control, is through prayer, Islamic prayer, meditation. This shifts us.
Jewish prayer, all prayers to God are sacred. Absolutely. And another thing, which is really strong, I would say, in all these three wonderful Abrahamic religion, is fellowship. Ariyana, you are in a country where you have personally told me you lack fellowship. Thank God for the mosque that you go to, but I insist, to our viewers, that seek fellowship more than anything. There is strength in numbers. There is motivation in numbers. There is inspiration in numbers. Now, more than any time, technology is not only bringing us together, but also separating us. Both of them are wonderful. We need separate time. We need alone time to digest this material and to process this material and to write about this material, which is what I do. But not more than any time in human history do we need fellowship more, because we are processing so much information individually. And when we come together, and this is a form of coming together, you all live in Finland, me here, and digesting together and comparing ideas and providing solutions and exposing people. But we physically need to come together as human beings. A pastor once said, we are not islands unto ourselves. We are social animals. We are.
There was a study done on this, actually, by Harvard University and Stanford University. They in a book written based on that study called The Connection, and it actually proved that the thing that determines why some people succeed and others fail is whether or not they have a meaningful, consistent relationship in their life. Whether they have the connection. It can be with friend or family. It can be with a partner, husband, wife. It can be with, a church organization or something like this. But it gives them that meaningful connection. It is the most vitally important human need that there is. And without it, you can have depression and premature death and things like this.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. They want to divide. This is their old tactic: divide and conquer. Divide us from each other, even divide us from ourselves. Cognitive dissonance, self-alienation, all these wonderful topics that psychologists have been telling us for a century. Self-alienation. I work with the youth, with young people as a professor. What I see with them is very alarming. Very alarming. Give them a smartphone and they can communicate. Put them next to each other. They have social anxiety, they have social phobia, they can't connect, and it's very horrifying. This is all part of transhumanism. This is all part of their agenda, by the way. There is a show that's being broadcasted in the United States now on HBO channel called Westworld. Some of my colleagues tried to tune me into that. It is extremely dark, but at the same time, it touches on transhumanism like no other show has done before. This is their agenda. They're preparing the public for for their agenda. So when it comes out, people will be prepared for it.
People will accept the program.
Come and call. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah. They're preparing their minds for it. So when they actually unleash their agenda, people would not resist. This goes back to the frog in the boiling pot analogy. If you put a toad, what do I call it? What did I just call it?
Frog.
I'm sorry, I'm having a I just had some incoming calls and I'm not answering it, so it distracted me. But yeah, if you put a frog in a cold pot of water over the stove and put the fire under the stove at a low temperature, the fire will never leap out. It will stay there until it dies.
The frog.
That's their strategy. Whereas if the pot is already hot, you throw in a frog in there, it'll jump right out. Their strategy is to put us in this pot of water, humanity compared to frog. I hate to use this analogy, but sometimes human beings act like frogs and toads. And for them to just die in the water, literally melt. You could see it. It's a scientific experiment. It will melt like something solid. It will melt right into water. It's disgusting, of course, but that's their strategy for us. So, and the media is trying to prepare us for that by these shows. I'm not saying don't watch these shows. I'm not endorsing it. Neither am I rejecting it. I'm just telling you the esoteric reasons behind that. And people are tuning in. It's extremely dark. I watched two episodes of it with two lovely friends of mine, and we got into this wonderful discussion about it. And so that's just one example. Transhumanism is deeply ingrained in their agenda. Population control, huge. They want to trigger World War III for two reasons. I mean, there's esoteric reason aside, population control, and number two, profits. Number three would be to wipe off the US $20 trillion US debt. Because that's what the war does. What the war does is you create artificial conflict, and then you scare people, and then all these countries who otherwise didn't have debt will go deep into debt for generations. You have the Islamic country of Turkey, which has shrewdly and intelligently wiped off its debt through the leadership of Erdogan. And I'm not endorsing Erdogan. Erdogan was on the wrong side of history until he found the light and decided not to support ISIS and ally himself with Russia. But Erdogan,
I'm not sure he had a choice.
Exactly. That's right. The CIA wanted to overthrow him, and he got the point. Boy, did he get the point. And Turkey is a country that was debt-free. Inshallah, it will stay debt-free. They want to take countries that are model Muslim countries, and I'm not saying Turkey is. Believe me, I'm not. I'm only talking financial here. And they want to throw them into debt, and that's one way of maintaining the petrodollar system of the U.S. global debt structure through wars. So we have to expose them. These issues that they're trying to artificially, I'm writing heavily right now, Ariyana, about World War III. The think tank that I work for wants me to expose these things, esoterically, geopolitically, every which way. They are really, especially if Secretary Clinton gets in, this she-devil. I'm not don't get me wrong, I'm not pro-Trump either. But if this she-devil gets in, I mean, from her rhetoric, the way she's single-handedly picking on Putin, and I'm not endorsing Putin, neither am I rejecting him. I'm just saying that there's never been a time in our presidential debates where the nominee of one party is openly demonizing the head of the other superpower left in the world. They're trying to pick a fight with Russia. That's how evil the Illuminati is. It's absolute lunacy. In a nuclear age, it's MAD, what we call MAD, mutually assured destruction. So even Hollywood, in its most diabolic nature, gives us movies where they actually reveal their agenda. They want to create, long-term space colonies.
I think they're preparing us to accept the agenda by showing it to us first.
Entertainment. We're sitting around eating popcorn, and we are being shown images of absolute horrifying images. And people are, sitting in a movie theater, eating popcorn. That's subconsciously preparing them for what they have, want to unleash on us. So when they actually do unleash on us, we have been psychologically prepared through infotainment or just pure entertainment. It makes me cringe when people call this entertainment. It's deep esoteric and occultic messages that are being transferred as far as their plan goes. And Hollywood, of course, is hand in hand with the Luciferian agenda. Some of these people in Hollywood are pure Luciferians, pure.
And one thing I want...
You're psychic, like people like yourself and me, you go near this area and you send so much negative energy. Hollywood Boulevard itself, there's a Freemasonic temple right there, not even hiding it.
I want to mention
Jimmy Kimmel had this show on ABC. Jimmy Kimmel is a lovely character, but his show is taped in this former Masonic temple, which doesn't even hide the fact that it's Masonic. You look up and it says Freemasonic Temple right on Hollywood Boulevard. They have become so emboldened, Ariana, that they're right in the open. They're no longer operating from behind a curtain or
Oh, the Satanists in some states are trying to introduce an actual course within the schools teaching Satanism, like another religion. But I wanted to mention,
they're saying everywhere where there's a they want to have a statue of Lucifer, Baphomet.
I want to mention something. Sure. This is important. That the mind control programming. Okay, the U.S. government is running the mind control programming. They introduced it in the 1940s into the U.S. society. The U.S. is the most mind-controlled society on the entire planet and has been for the longest. Yeah. What they discovered is that if they combine occult ritual, black magic, basically, occult ritual with the mind control, it's more effective.
Yeah.
And so that's why we see these symbology.
Yeah.
In Hollywood, they're putting it into the children's minds. Like Walt Disney, for example, he was a CIA operative, and he was hired to create mass media mind control programming for children. This has been proven.
Totally. Satanic subliminal messages and extremely sexual subliminal messages in Disney cartoons and advertisement. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
The project is well known, You and I have often talked about that particular project, the mind control project, in deep within the CIA and other intelligentsia apparatus in this country. I think they realized that the reason the United States, they picked on the U.S. was that the potential of the U.S. from the outset was so high. U.S. was, although the founding fathers, which are talked about so openly, in the constitutional movement in America, yeah, they were, 7 out of 10 of them were openly Freemasonic agents. But Freemasonic beliefs back then were a little bit different than they are now. Now they're purely Luciferianism. Back then they were Luciferian too, but there was
it got infiltrated. The Freemason society was so powerful because of the rich and so they got infiltrated by Zionism, I think, after the French Revolution.
The Illuminati totally took over, but my point is that America had great potential, but right from the beginning, right when the British got into our system through the financial system, through the Rothschild Bank, which at that time was called the Bank of England. Okay, they got right into our system through Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of Finance at that time. There was a duel between him and Aaron Burr. I mean, the hatred. Imagine that. They had there was such a battle of ideas that they were willing to die for it. I wish we had that today. But Alexander Hamilton and the War of 1812, that was a purely Rothschild war in which they burned Washington, D.C. down to the ground. Mm. The British, at that time, the embodiment of Freemasonic thought and Luciferianism and Illuminati, they wanted to destroy America right from the beginning because America was founded on the principle of freedom and fighting tyranny, especially the British tyranny. And unfortunately, through our financial system, they came and they took over right from 1812. The devil, when devil can defeat you, will try to join you. So if people like us who are on the forefront of this battle of awakening or this awakening movement, when the other side wants to cooperate with you, be extremely careful, because at that point, when they haven't been able to defeat you, they would want you to join their club. Why else do you think they are so open nowadays to Iran? They have tried to fight the Iranian revolution for 40 years. They know they can't defeat it. They know Iranians have extremely powerful, they have soft power, which is very powerful, and they haven't defeated it, so now they're trying to join it, or they're trying to make them join us through this JCPOA and nuclear agreements. That's why I go to Iran more often than before now, because I feel tremendous amount of an anxiety for them, and they have no idea. They look at the whole thing very positively. Now they're going to be part of the nuclear club. Now they're going to do trade with them. No, the devil tried to defeat you. They failed. Now they want you to join them. So you got to be very careful, very, very careful. This happens at an individual level and also at the societal level, even at the national level, which I just gave you an example.
We have about 5 minutes, and then it will be 2 hours. So is there anything else you'd like to say? I mean, I guess we got to wrap it up.
You want to go over some of your questions you have, the ones we haven't answered?
Well, the other questions I had focused on the Middle East and Syria, and that's like a big discussion. We could just focus on that within the next discussion.
Okay. Real quick,
itself.
Syria. There's some there's some eschatology within ISIS, eschatological beliefs within ISIS, end time events. There's a town in Syria called Dabiq, or Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q. I strongly encourage our viewers to research that town. It has incredible influence over the false Islamic eschatology about what happens in that particular town. It would be the equivalent of the Judeo-Christian symbology of Armageddon, or Armageddon, the city, the village, or the historical ruins of a mountain in Palestine called Armageddon. So I strongly encourage our viewers to look into that. That is behind a lot of that is ideologically and esoterically and in occultic beliefs, false Islamic eschatology, false, if I may say. Dabiq has incredible amounts of symbology.
So I guess it would be true to say that the Zionists...
Ariana, that's why Syria is so important to them.
Okay.
Otherwise, Syria doesn't have really anything, no natural resources. They have discovered incredible amount of natural gas in the Syrian territorial waters in East Mediterranean, which the Israelis are just totally excavating. The Syrian share, the Lebanese share, and also the share for Gaza. That's why Gaza is under siege. That's why Gaza has been under siege since 2006. Gaza could be one of the richest oil exporting nations because of the natural gas under Mediterranean. The Israelis have created this ISIS distraction, and they are totally excavating all this oil that doesn't even belong to them. The biggest one is called Leviathan, by the way. Leviathan natural gas field under the Mediterranean. Interesting, Leviathan or monster. So,
as it is. As I understand it, actually, there was somebody who leaked information on that. The oil reserve off the coast of Gaza and Gaza waters is a big one, but there's an even bigger one under Gaza soil. And this is something that is not talked about, and I think that Israel doesn't want people to know about that. But when they were bombing Gaza in 2014, they literally moved the borders in, and Gaza, which is a large population in a small, dense area, they lost 45% of Gaza.
I know. I'm so glad you brought that up to my attention. Absolutely. It's economic. Von Clausewitz, a brilliant Prussian, German theoretician, military strategist to Napoleon, and then after Napoleon to the Russians. Von Clausewitz said something brilliant, which is politics is an extension of economics by other means. Now, Alexander Azadgan, says I would say economics is an extension of something else, something much bigger. So we can always conclude that the root of war is in economics, not ideology. Not ideology. Ideology is the front. No one is going to want to go fight for oil. But people would voluntarily be dumb enough to think they're fighting against terrorism. It's not. They're not fighting against terrorism. They're fighting with the terrorists. The first thing that ISIS did when they went to Syria was they took control of the oil field and started exporting through the black market through Turkey. Absolutely. That's proven. That's a proven fact. My point is, behind every war, the actual motivation behind every war has nothing to do with ideology. If you go back to one of the first recorded wars, right? The wars between the Greeks and the Trojans. had nothing to do about Helen. You know, Homer wanted to romanticize the whole thing, and Homer, the Greek writer, historian, and, you know, inserted the Helen of Troy, which became the, you know, it was actually Helen of Sparta. He wanted to romanticize this story for the Greek theater at that time. But really, the intention behind that war was economics. Troy was the richest country, or the richest nation state at that time in Asia Minor. It was all about economics. But nobody would want to fight for that. Soldiers need something to fight for. They need an ideology. They need a cause. So they made it about their honor of getting Helen back to Sparta. And Trojans, of course, made it about the honor of saving this woman from these devils, saving this woman, Helen, from the devil Spartans by refuging her, by creating refuge for her. So my whole point is, it has nothing to do with ideology, but they will use ideology and religion and belief and sacred things to make young men die. War is when old men talk and young men die, period. Every war in human history. I can give you the reason for it intellectually, academically. That's why we have to be against wars altogether. You know, the only people that win in a war situation are the international bankers, Rothschilds, the steel industry and the armament industry and the energy sector. Every time in every war since we discovered oil and steel. But before that, it was just power, raw power.
Wow. We've come to the end of 2 hours.
It just feels we're just really touching the tip of the iceberg.
That's how I feel too. I'm like, gosh, we just scratched the surface.
Okay, this is a prelude for our next discussions. This is going to be an episode in a series of discussions we're going to have. We're going to get into nitty-gritty stuff, which for the nature of your questions, we have to lay down the foundation for our audience. And in the next few videos, after I return from my academic mission, we will get into this extremely religiously.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. And I think what we'll do is we'll keep the broadcast to 1 hour, just so it's easier for the listener. But because this was the first one, I thought it would be better to give more time to really give the historic information.
For like different, you know how they have the season opener, and the season opener episode is always longer than the others. Yeah. Yeah. 1 hour, because the audience, if they look at the video before on YouTube before they watch it and they see 2 hours, they would be like, whoa, 2 hours. People have short attention spans, like 5 to 7 minutes. So we'll keep it to 1 hour, or even we could keep it in half an hour segments, but we'll just record them in half an hour segments, and we'll post them on YouTube so people can digest it easier.
Yeah, we can do that. So, Professor Azadgan, thank you very much for your time, and best of luck in Iran. And I am Ariyana Love with Middle East Rising, TLB Director of the Liberty Beacon and Middle East Rising. Thank you.
Thank you.